Welcome to Back from the Abyss. I'm Dr. Craig Heacock. This is a place for stories of hope and healing, recovery, and redemption. First, a couple of announcements about upcoming trainings. The workshop that I'm doing with Hilary McBride this May in Victoria, British Columbia is almost full. It's called I Love You, I Hate You, Are You My Mom? And very relevant to today's episode, we'll be doing an experiential deep dive into working with transference and countertransference. You can link to more information and registration through the show notes. Also, I wanted to announce that I'll again be doing my training called Bringing Therapy into Med Management this October here in Fort Collins. This is a psychotherapy intensive workshop designed primarily for psychiatric NPs and PAs who want to up their therapy game. We'll be learning how to work in the unfolding clinical moment, how and when to utilize the here and now, plus we'll go deep into our own shadow and countertransference tendencies. The training's almost full, mostly from last year's waiting list, so if you're interested, sign up right away. Check out the trainings page on my website for more information and registration. Today I'm featuring an interview I recently did with my friend and colleague Carrie Haynes on her podcast called The Web, Weaving Psychology and Soul into Circle Work. You may remember Carrie from Season 5 of Back from the Abyss. She's a Colorado-based group therapy expert and consultant, and we did an episode called Moving from the Head to the Heart, the Gifts and Challenges of Group Therapy. I think you will find that this is a pretty special conversation, and for me, this is one of my most favorite interviews.
I so enjoyed recording this podcast. Craig and I sat down in his office here in Fort Collins face to face, and it really does have a different feel recording live. Craig records all of his podcasts live for that very reason, that the authenticity and depth is more palpable when you're in the room face to face. And I'm considering recording more of my episodes that are interviews and storytelling sessions live because there is a different felt sense. I was really touched throughout the episode by Craig's authenticity and candor. He shared so much about his personal experiences, mistakes made, challenges, and also his own personal psychology and how that has shown up in group work. At times, I wish that we would have recorded on video so you could see the connection between us and also my reactions during the times that Craig was sharing, because I really was touched and so much happens in that nonverbal space. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I did and that it's helpful for you. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Craig Heacock. So Craig, glad you're here. Welcome to the podcast.
It's really good to be here.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, huh?
Yeah, it has been.
Yeah. Well, I think I'd just like to jump right in. We are going to be talking about transference and countertransference. And I'm excited about this episode because it feels like so many times we talk generally about group stuff and concepts. And so I'm excited to get into something that's specific and juicy. And there's so much in this to pull apart. Yeah. So, and I think people are often scared of this topic and also really excited and interested in all that can come. So I'm looking forward to it. So I'd love to hear from you, just starting when you were introduced to the concepts of transference and countertransference in your training, just maybe harken back to the beginnings of learning about this and maybe even experiencing it for the first time.
Well, I had the good fortune to go to a psychiatric residency, Brown University in Providence, that had a very heavy psychodynamic orientation. So we did, after our internship year, we did 3 years of psychodynamic weekly therapy. So we did 3 weekly psychodynamic patients, and we had a psychodynamic supervisor. And so this was all about transference, countertransference. But I think the reality was it took years to really get it. You know, I love to think in metaphor and analogy. I really think learning to work with transference and countertransference is a little bit like learning to be a soccer player. So, you know, if your first coach in youth soccer said, okay, I really want to work on field awareness, you would have no idea what they're talking about. Like you're just trying to figure out, wait, how do I kick the ball? Do I use my toe or the inside? For years in soccer, what are you trying to do? You're trying to learn how to feel the ball and pass and shoot and juggle and dribble and know where you're supposed to be. But then if you keep playing soccer or hockey or, even really skiing in some ways, if you keep doing these sports, you can reach a level where you don't have to think about how do I turn, how do I shoot, how do I pass. You can start to sort of, your awareness comes up to the space and you start to develop field awareness or chord awareness. And this is where everything changes, because this is where the experts live. Mm-hmm. And also this is where the game lives, because really soccer and football and hockey and all these are not one. These are won by the people who have field awareness. And I really think what's happening, to bring it back to therapy, is, we learn some therapeutic skills and how to ask good questions and how to sit with people and how to hold psychospiritually and how to work in the here and now. But to really understand what's happening in this sort of crackling space between, again, it's important to start learning it from the beginning, but you're so lost in what am I supposed to say? Like, what is happening? That, again, it's as a baby therapist, it took years and years and years, but there were some really painful early lessons. So one of them was, I think I told about this on my podcast maybe 3 years ago. I had this woman in my third year, and this was not in my psychodynamic long-term, this was in my regular clinic. She came in, and the resident who passed her off to me said, okay, she's very tough. She's very traumatized, very tough. So this woman basically came in, sat down, turned away from me and just frowned and wouldn't talk. So I tried to be patient. I tried to ask questions. I don't know how long I was patient for, knowing me back in those days, probably not very long. So then I started asking her more kind of obnoxious questions and poking, and nothing. So I think by maybe the second or third session, I just started writing notes. I remember she turned away from me. I turned away from her. Said, well, I'm just going to work on the computer. So she sat there the whole session. I just did stuff on the computer. At the end of the session, I said, well, it looks like you're not really ready to engage in therapy. So instead of seeing each other weekly, let's do every 3 months. And at that, she got up, slammed my door open, and went out and punched her fist into this huge glass window outside my office and smashed the window with her fist. Wow. And then stormed away.
Wow.
So I remember, again, I didn't have a name for this then, but when I met with my supervisor, who actually wasn't my psychodynamic supervisor, this is my regular outpatient, she said, do you know what just happened? She said, do you know what an enactment is? Do you understand countertransference sadism? I said, no. She said, we're still learning about this woman, but this woman has a ton of pain, probably a ton of trauma. She brought out anger and hatred and really sadism in you. And she turned you into the abuser. And she then suffered a terrible wound and showed you how much you hurt her and then ran away. Mm-hmm. And she said, you just played out this woman's central trauma dynamic. And I was so horrified. But then my supervisor, as good supervisors do, she said, this is such a good learning case. That's why you're here. That's why we're doing this. And she said, and this will happen again. That was when I first really got into, this was, back in 2002, 2003. This is when I started really getting interested in this idea that we could hurt our patients. Mm. We could harm them, usually not intentionally. Because I think if you'd asked me at that point, was I really trying to hurt her when I said I'll see you every 3 months? I thought, no, she's not really a customer. Mm-hmm. But no, it was all about, I wanted to hurt her because she was making me so frustrated and angry. And through this process of projective identification, where unconsciously in this co-created space, which is a pretty wild thing, it's kind of a psychospiritual thing, but she turned me into the abuser and I became this angry, sadistic person. And only later, years later, and that's another interesting story, maybe we'll get to, maybe we won't, she wrote me a long, long, long letter and told me about her abuse, which I never learned about. And she apologized to me. She wrote me a letter like 8 years later. She said, "I'm sorry, I was such a bad patient."
So did you repair from that?
No.
In order for, so just out of the blue, you got a letter from her. Like,
Yeah.
did you ever see her again?
Well, no, I did. I saw her the whole third year in my outpatient clinic.
Every 3 months?
No. No, my supervisor said, you have to repair this. So I went back and I said, we can go back to seeing each other every week or two. But we were not, so much trust was, I mean, when that enactment happened, it was such a repeat of her trauma that she never really trusted me. And I would say that whole year, I couldn't even really hold her in the therapeutic Rogerian way. Like I was just kind of coexisting with her. No, it was an unexpected, unsolicited letter, like 8 years later out of the blue.
Wow.
Where she said, "I'm so much better and a resident 2 years after you really made the difference. And here's how she did it. And I was a terrible patient to you and you were mean to me, but I know why you were. And I forgive you. And I still think fondly of you." And I mean, it was so meaningful. Mm-hmm. And I was a terrible therapist and doctor. But, hopefully we're learning from our mistakes. I will never forget that. And, we can explore this a little further. But one of the things I learned from her about me is silence is really hard for me for all sorts of countertransferential reasons, for family of origin reasons, for Enneagram reasons. There's a long list of reasons why silence is hard for me. And one of my biggest challenges as a therapist has been to understand that, to work with it. Even the other day, one of my psych NP students who was rotating with me, I brought up this silence issue. She's like, "You do great with silence." I said, I am really so pleased that you say that as you sit with me. I said, this has taken 20 years of work to be able to sit with silence because it brings up everything in me, all very anxiety, agitation provoking, and not helpful to the patient.
Mm. You know what it's bringing up for me, I love that story. And what it brings up for me is a little bit of discomfort, because what I realize is, I don't know if you've experienced this, but having psychoanalytic training or, more psychodynamic training isn't as common anymore. There's sort of this vibe that it's like, that's kind of the old stuff with all this new stuff. But then I think about this way that you've had to know yourself and that people have to really learn about themselves, right? And you being able to see that as an enactment or to see your own discomfort with silence. And I guess I'm curious, even the work that you're doing with other psych NPs, like, are they even getting any context around this kind of psychodynamic, just all the ways that we could be playing this out? Because even with great training, right, we're still, this is a messy web, right? So I'm just...
No, in fact, this is my new, I always have a bunch of passions. I'm an Enneagram 7. I am all in on trying to help the next generation of psych NPs. Not just get better, but to become psychodynamically informed. Mm-hmm. So whether it's the folks who are rotating with me, the psych NPs who do consultation mentoring with me, or the ones who come to my intensive trainings, like I'm realizing that psych NPs not only get little to no therapy training, they basically, most of them get zero psychodynamic training, which again would be like trying to be an excellent soccer player just by being really good at passing and shooting and dribbling, but having no field awareness. Because if you can't just drop back and look like what is happening, what's likely to happen, because so much of psychodynamic work is, you were abandoned by your alcoholic mother. That's going to happen here. Mm-hmm. And it's going to happen over and over and over. And how will the abandonment play out? I need to look for it. We need to plan for it. We need to discuss it. We need to analyze it. But to try to help our patients with interpersonal trauma, which is what percentage of our patients,
right,
without a knowledge of again, what's occurring in the space between of the old scripts that are playing out over and over and that are definitely going to include you, because the only way the therapist is going to get left out of transference is if the patient or client really feels zero connection to them. Because, when does transference happen is really, when does it not happen? Mm-hmm. I'd say it doesn't happen if the therapist patient feels no connection at all and feels completely disinterested, yeah, there might be little to no transference. But, I used to think early in my psychodynamic training that transference was like a rainbow or like a special concert ticket or like a pelican sighting. Like it was a thing, like, whoa, there's a pelican, and hey, did you. But then I started to realize that no. Transference is the water we swim in. Like it's not about when is transference going to show up in the relationship. It's how much and what type. Mm-hmm. And same with countertransference. I used to think early in my training, like, I wonder when I'm going to have some significant countertransference. And now I realize, when am I not? Mm-hmm. When am I not? Mm-hmm. One of my favorite recent episodes of my podcast, we talked about this idea of becoming like a clear jar. The therapist, a clear jar, not so all the therapist stuff, the sediment settles to the bottom. And Erin Jacqueline came up with this beautiful metaphor, and she said she tries to keep the jar of herself very clear and everything, all the stuff settled at the bottom. But if you're going to get involved with people, if you're going to actually feel their energy and start to mix up your stuff, like your jar is going to get very cloudy. With confusion, with anger, with sexual attraction, with revulsion, with anger, with sadism, with all that. And, right, so you can try to ignore it. You can pretend that if I just have enough skills, like if I just pass well enough and shoot well enough and dribble well enough, I don't have to actually be aware of what's happening on this field. Or you can like, no. That is the most important thing, is what is happening on this field right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's why I'm so grateful to have been trained in the here and now and to actually attend to that relationship more than anything, because I feel like that skill, that like underlying, that I was taught to work with that rather than ignore it. And still, I would say that it still trips me up all the time. Like I'm still like unaware. You'd think after all these years of practicing that there would be some like mastery. I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel like I have to. It's like so dynamic, and that it's so like alive that it's like I can get more aware, but I still am in it, really in it.
Right. Yeah. I think the more you learn therapy, especially psychodynamic work, the more you realize it's like learning a language. And, the favorite question everyone asks, are you fluent? And I think the more you learn a language, the more you pretty much have to say no. Mm-hmm. Because invariably stuff comes up like, what is that? How do I say that? And invariably in our sessions, like just a couple of weeks ago, I felt myself getting so angry at this patient. He was shaking with anger. I was shaking with anger. And I lashed out at him in the most passive aggressive, brutal way that I could. And I made him cry. And part of me was really pleased with myself. I was like, yeah, showed him. He's going to come in and scare me and threaten me. Like, I got the power. And I scared the shit out of him. And he left, and afterwards I thought, all these years of doing therapy, and I fall back into that pattern of like, this is a guy who grew up with a lot of trauma, a lot of interpersonal trauma, very toxic personality disordered mother. And guess what? We reenacted that whole thing, turning me into the abuser, the ignorer, the one hurting him and ignoring him and threatening to abandon him. So luckily, as we know, that one of the most powerful things you can do in therapy is go back and apologize and explore. And I called him later that day. I said, I am so sorry. I wish I could take that back. I promise I will be better. I promise I will do everything to stay regulated and peaceful and be what you need. And so far, it's been pretty healing. We'll see. I'm sure we will cycle back to that. Because again, psychotherapy is psychotherapy. And, our stuff, both therapist stuff, patient stuff, and the co-created stuff, like that's going to keep coming up over and over and over. And so good that it does. It's so great because that's what we work on. Mm-hmm. That's the material.
And were you able to share with him, like, this is what happened? Like, do you do that in zooming out and saying, this is what I'm thinking happened between us, and really examining that in the next session?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think more what happens is, so in my evaluation of people, one of the things I'm looking at is what kinds of interpersonal issue/trauma are they bringing into the relationship? So sometimes I see someone, only has OCD. They grew up in a loving, stable family. They felt supported, loved, and unconditionally accepted. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, we're not going to have any probably meaningful countertransfer or countertransference issues here. But that's rare, because psychiatric illness tracks big time with addiction and abandonment and sexual abuse and assault. And so, most people are coming to my office and bringing a lot of stuff. So again, the first part of your question is I try to identify what is the likely dynamic that could show up. Let's say abandonment. And then I teach people because we kind of assume that people understand what therapy is or what treatment is. They have no idea. So I might say, here's what I'm thinking about your treatment, A, B, C, D, E. And I want to point something out. There's this thing called transference. It's this magical thing where I get to see your issues play out in the room between you and me. And as hard as it may be to imagine, at some point, if we stay close and connected and work together, you're going to feel completely abandoned by me. And I'm just going to ask you now, when that happens, can we talk about it? Would you alert me? Would you promise not to disappear, to freak out? And so I plant those seeds. Then, I'm not going to feel abandoned by you. You care. Invariably, it's going to happen. So then, but what I often find happens is when it plays out in the session, it's kind of like that parenting maxim that, strike when the iron's cold. When there's a lot of heat, arousal, whether patient and or you, there's no learning happening. So more often than not, if things kind of blow up at an enactment, try to kind of put the fire out, but it's the next session or session after, and or a text or call afterwards and say, can we talk about what happened? Mm-hmm. Do you remember how I said that A and B were likely to play out? So I think that played out. And you know what? I got sucked into it and I jumped into the role of the abandoner or the critic or whatever. And we can learn from this. We can explore this. So there's this whole kind of thing, I think, working with people with interpersonal wounds of teaching them this whole idea of stuff playing out in the room, inviting them to asking them to kind of promise to talk about it. When it happens, put the fire out. Expect that, again, if there's a lot of arousal, you're probably not going to do a lot of work then, but you can always cycle back. Mm-hmm. And some of the most intense things, I remember some of the most intense things that happened in residency in session here and now. Inevitably, if it was really hot, I would change the topic. Because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe what you just said. I don't know what to do. I'm going to change the topic. And the attending would be listening to the little audio tape, a little cassette recorder, and the attending say something like, oh, this is 5 to 6 weeks of material right here. You changing the topic on this hot item. So what you need to do is you go back and you start the session with this and you go right in and you stay with it until it's worked through. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they'd be thrilled. I'm like, what? We're going to have to spend 5 or 6 weeks. Yep, it's probably going to be 5 or 6 weeks on this, but it's so core. It's because something played out really hot and heavy through enactment. And I just like, it's too much. Like, it's too much anger. It's too much erotic transference. It's too much whatever. I got to run away and like, how's your lithium? Oh, how are you sleeping? Oh, are you suicidal?
Right. Right.
Oh wait, let's see. You owe us $10 for the copay for the resident clinic.
I'm curious. I want to move into group because then, we're talking about this and you just can feel like the aliveness and the dynamic of how often this is happening in every relationship and every interaction. But then we get into a group and now we've got 8 systems, facilitators, like, let's just kind of go there since that's the focus.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Carrie, you and I agree totally on this. A lot of people think group therapy is like diluted therapy or cheaper therapy is not as good therapy. Group therapy is therapy on steroids. It's transference on steroids. It's countertransference on steroids. One image I had just as we were talking about recording this was, if you think about, like, let's think about transference like this. Like, say you're my therapist and let's just give your countertransference of color. Let's say it's purple. I'm getting a lot of purple from you, whatever that is. Maternal loving energy. But if I'm in a group, it's very likely that 8 people in the group, I may have like a mauve color and a black color and a green and a forest green and a purple. And these are all the different transferences and countertransferences that are coming to me. But the other interesting thing is like the colors meld together. So, you know, my sky blue and your purple becomes something different in this co-created space. So, but then if you imagine each person in the group is experiencing everyone else probably in a different color. Like maybe 2 or 3 of the group members experience you in this sort of loving purple maternal holding energy, but maybe someone experiences you as like black, darkness, loathing, shaming. So everyone is experiencing each other in different ways with different lenses, with different transferential templates, and then the colors are mixing. That's like the co-creation. And so it's this really complicated spectrum of all sorts of stuff. And so one challenge of the group therapist is to recognize like that is the point. Mm-hmm. You know, someone comes in like, my boss, my coworkers, and my coworker, my boss, and my job. You know, that's fine. But really, all that there and then storytelling is to get the group activated to like, hey, Jason, I noticed while Craig was telling his story, you rolled your eyes and you turned away from the group and you looked very angry. I noticed that. I wonder if you could speak to that. Mm-hmm. Whatever, like in trying to bring it back to the group. And again, we have to teach that to group members, which I learned the hard way when I was learning to do process groups, because we are just learning it. I didn't really know it was supposed to happen. And so, and again, it's really easy to think that therapy is where you go and you talk about your problems and what happened and your hard this and your hard that and traumatic this, which it is, but really it's another metaphor would be like, you know, if you went to a master tennis coach or pro, yeah, you're gonna hit balls with them and serve, but really that's only so they can really watch like, what are your tendencies? Like, what's your tennis psychology? Like, what are you bringing and not bringing to the court? That's the cool stuff. Mm-hmm. So yes, group therapy is so complicated and rich and fascinating and again, I think far more powerful and triggering, if you will, activating than people would ever realize if they haven't done it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the myth, the myth that group therapy is just like an easier way to disseminate information. But when you see it's like this, I mean, even the guy like that you were doing the blah, blah, blah work and blah, blah, you know, it's like, what I'm always saying is just imagine that he's talking about the group, like everything that comes in, because there's a reason that he's complaining about his boss or that people aren't getting him. Mm-hmm. So like in your own mind, anything that gets brought in, there's a reason that is coming up to be talked about. And it's likely being brought up by whatever's happening in the group. So just insert you as the facilitator or the other group members are the coworkers. You're the boss. Like, not always, but a lot of the times, right? That's why we're choosing to talk about these things outside of the room, because those same feelings are coming up in the room. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So you've talked before, maybe like when I did a podcast with you, or maybe listening to your podcast, which I love, is about the experience that you had when you had somebody just directly say, you know, you're a narcissist. I want to hear, because I think that
this was in the episode. This is the episode I did with you and Back from the Abyss.
Okay.
But yeah, I can lead up to it. Yeah, actually, no, she told me that I was a arrogant asshole. Oh, okay. Yeah.
That kind of is my definition of sort of narcissist.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I was just trying to get something going. so yeah, but I think my 2 first participatory group experiences, actually, in hindsight, I learned the same thing. Mm-hmm. So one was a group therapy weekend. I think it was by the Massachusetts Group Therapy Society or something. It was at Wellesley College. And it was my chief resident year and my co-chief resident, and I went and did a group, mostly with a bunch of women MSWs, the 2 of us. But then also right around that time, the two of us went to this national gathering of chief residents of psychiatry programs all over the country. And we had heard that something mysterious happened at this retreat, and nobody would talk about it. Well, it turns out what was mysterious was they divided all the chief residents, like 200 of us, into groups of like 7 or 8 with a couple, I think they were psychiatrists. They didn't really speak. And they put us in 2 rooms for 2 days and just put us in there with no instruction. Just put us in a circle. So we didn't know, is this group therapy? Is this like, what is this? So I think like a lot of groups, and this happened in both my group experiences, nothing happened. Silence, silence, silence.
Which is fun for you.
Yes. So for a whole lot of reasons that I've learned about me over the last 20 years, I was not willing and able to just sit in silence. The Enneagram 7 part of me is like, we got to make this fun, exciting. One of the things I was not allowed to be in my family of origin was idle, was unsuccessful, was, in my family of origin, I was seen as the leader, extrovert, achiever, the one you could always count on to make something happen. My mom, who's just the most amazing person, she would always say to me, you can do anything. You can make anything happen. You could be president, you could be an astronaut, you could write a bestseller, you could do anything, which is lovely. But and then you put all that together, and I'm in this group where nothing is happening, whether it was the group at Wellesley with the MSWs and my friend, or with all the co-chief residents. And so I got something going. So I don't remember exactly what I said, but I think in both groups I started it, or if I wasn't the first person to talk, I was at least the second. I probably tried to make them laugh. I may have said provocative things. I may have harassed the leaders and said, like, what are you doing? This is dumb. But I remember increasingly throwing bombs, whether it was to be funny or just like get something going, because I thought, again, I need to make it happen. We can't waste this time. Time is precious. Let's make something exciting and meaningful and cool happen. Let's be the best group. Like whatever's happening in all these other groups, like let's make this group the most kick-ass group, the group that everyone's going to wish they were in. But I think the side result is some people in the group, including the woman who had those choice words for me, did not experience me well. I think they thought, this guy's taken over. He's full of himself. When really what I was trying to do is like, let's make this happen. Like, let's turn up this party or turn up something. Like, let's get it going. Let's not sit in silence, because I hate it, because silence is boring and anxiety provoking and it feels like failure. And it took me so long to not feel like silence was failure, because I'm like, something's got to happen. I mean, now I realize, like a lot is happening in silence. So, worlds are contained in silence. But in those earlier, especially in those early group experiences, I thought, I'm gonna crank it up. I'm gonna be the DJ of this group, and some people I'm sure thought it was lovely and fun, and some people are like, you suck. Shut up. Just shut up and sit down and let somebody else do it. It's so embarrassing to talk about. But
it's funny though, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking like there's so many strengths to that style, and your style, and then that she's the way her transference is coming at, like, that it's not really the intention, but the impact on her. And I find it so fascinating. I'd love to go back. And I mean, this is one of my favorite interventions, is when somebody says something like that, like, oh, so you experience Craig as this, and you're feeling quite irritated. I'm wondering if other people experience him that way. And then if, 7 people are like, yeah, that's pretty good feedback of like, oh, I'm not having the intended impact. But sometimes it's like, no, I actually was appreciative, because we're sitting here in science. I wanted someone to get this started. I was getting ready to do that. Then there's a whole different energy. And I think that's one of the best group interventions, because you get to really see what is it really something feedback for me? And of course, there's always like a kernel of truth. There's always like something there, but then we get to discern, like, what's me, what's you. I feel like that's always the piece.
Yeah. And in the chief resident retreat, I think I told this story when you were on my podcast, that by, I don't know, hour 3, I was looking around and thinking, I can't stand this one guy. I was like, he's a fucking asshole. And he'd barely spoken. And I don't even know how to judge that. This was a bunch of transference and a whole bunch of like stuff in the air between us. But what I realized by the end of the second day was he was a lot like me, but he was, I think, more developed maybe as a human or as a therapist. He kept very quiet. And there was part of me that was just raging at him. I think as I thought, I could see like you're a kindred spirit and you're just like choosing to stay out of the fray. You're just staying quiet and you're observing. And I took that as a very aggressive stance. When really he was just being thoughtful and being a good group member. And then when we could work that out by the end of the second day, we hugged and I was like, you're awesome. And I had so much shit I put on you. Like I had this whole story about you. He's like, oh yeah, I did about you too. So
was there somebody in your life that he, like now looking back, that you're like, because so much around transference is this person is like my father, or this person is like this, or was it just a sense or a feeling that was being brought up?
I think this would be a 20-minute exploration, and then it would really be Craig's therapy session. But for a whole complicated suite of reasons, I don't do well if I think people aren't carrying their load. Like when I've worked with people who I think aren't working hard enough, who are slacking, I'm sure looking back, I thought, you're not carrying your load. I can see you enough to know that you could help make this group amazing and kick ass, and you're just sitting there. So I've always had this, and this can play out with my patients too, and I'm much better at handling it now. But if I feel like people aren't trying hard enough, if they're not giving their all, and part of that is, my lifelong thing is I'm a competitive runner. I've been running, to the point of collapse and vomiting since I was 11. I'm 58. So part of what's just beaten into me as a competitive athlete is you push yourself as hard as you can, and then you go harder, and then you go harder, and you need to go harder, and you go till you collapse. And then you have a chance at winning. Mm-hmm. So one of my superpowers is, as a competitive runner, I've been able to push myself really hard, and that has brought me incredible gifts, and that has caused me terrible pain. Mm-hmm. And I think it's caused, maybe some of my fellow group members or patients or other people I've worked with where I thought, or probably it was more unconsciously thinking, you're not working hard enough, you're not engaging enough, you're too quiet, you're too passive, you're too inert, you don't have good enough goals. And it would make me really critical and even dismissive or even cruel, especially early in my career. Mm-hmm. And again, why do therapists need to know themselves extremely well and keep that process going? Because we have wells of mystery inside of us. And as we grow and change, different strengths come out and different weaknesses come out. And the reality is we're going to hurt different patients in different ways in different parts of our career if we're not really careful. Mm-hmm. And at least if we're being mindful, we can recognize when we have hurt someone or we're about to hurt someone and do something about it. Mm-hmm. Not just, pin it all on the patient, like, oh, they left, or they didn't try hard enough, or they're a treatment failure, versus like, put in the mirror, like, what was my role in that?
Yeah, it's so easy to put it on them, especially with all the power that we have, and to not be self-reflective, and even to have colleagues agree with you. Like, yeah, they're not ready. Like, I might have been in your hall, and you come to me and say, she just sat there and didn't say anything. I finally did my notes. I'm like, good for you. She's not ready for treatment, right? Like, I've seen this happen, right? Where we collude with the projection, the transference, and really kind of help to take on that role of being the one that causes harm, right? Mm-hmm. But I also just want to say that makes me tender too, because I think about, and I see this all the time in my groups, that a lot of times the transference that comes up is because people are embodying things that we won't allow ourselves to do. So I have a lot of people who won't take up a lot of space, and they're so pissed off at the person that is sharing and that is using a lot of words. But it's always interesting that the person who's so angry just isn't allowed to have the space, or just like you, like, isn't allowed to be the one that slacks. Like, in some way, that permission, whatever way we internalize it, like, I don't get that. Or somebody who like needs care so much, they want the care, but they won't let themselves ask for it. And so they resent, and they're so angry at the group member that everyone gives care to. So it's so rich and juicy to see how those things come alive.
I mean, I remember, I had not thought about this in so long. I remember speakers in med school, whether it was faculty or outside speakers, that, would give a really great talk and then questions at the end. I would always have questions. And part of that was, I'm curious, but secondly, especially if it was a good talk, I would think, this person deserves to have some good questions so we don't look like a bunch of inert, lame, shut down, passive lamos. I want the speaker to leave and think, oh, these med students are on it. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of my fellow med students like, oh God, Craig has his hand up again. He's going to ask something else. And again, I hadn't really thought about this in a long time, but I'm sure of it as part of the same dynamic of me having trouble with silence, or me, sitting in those early groups and needing to make something happen because I'm like, okay, like this is our one and only wild and precious life, or wild and precious group, or, post lecture time, like, let's get some good questions going. Let's make it happen. Like, let's turn up the fire here. Like, are we just going to sit and do nothing? Like, really? Like, is that who we are? Just passive, inert people? Which is, again, we were not allowed to be in my family of origin.
Mm-hmm.
When I was growing up, if I was reading, I'd have to hide, because it was like, what are you doing? There's work to do. There's things to do. Like, you're just sitting around reading, and it was frowned upon.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, it makes so much sense. And that's the beauty too of group therapy and individual therapy, that if I were a group therapist in that, we would get to explore and say, what was that like to hear? But not just that, it's like, I feel like, what was happening for you in the silence that made you speak up? And then you would share some of this with me, and I might say, it feels like there's an important story there. And then all of a sudden, when we hear where this comes from anyone, right, is when all of a sudden the transference can be sort of dissolved and we get to see the real person. So I'm curious your thoughts about this. I've interviewed a couple of people that are doing different types of groups, and they'll say things like, well, we don't try to work with the transference. We just dissolve it. So I'll give you an example. One was a person who said, somebody would say like, you remind me, and say, Craig, you remind me of my father. And he would just say to them, well, I'm not your father, but let's deal with your father. So just to not even let that start to happen so that it doesn't play out. So I'm curious, like, how you hear that. And another, like even in IFS, there's, these circles where we're not really working with what comes in the room as much. So, our psychodrama groups, but we know it's in the room. So I don't know that you would have the answer, but I'm just curious to talk to you about groups that maybe don't focus on transference. It's like interpersonal process groups. You're waiting for it to happen. But there are so many types of therapy and groups where it's just kind of like this thing that might get in the way, but it's not really the juice.
Mm-hmm. I just am reminded of this metaphor I've thought of psychodynamic work. It's almost like psychodynamic work teaches you, imagine you're navigating your way through a forest. And psychodynamic work, the equivalent there would be like learning to listen to the bird sounds and listening to or looking at the way the clouds are forming in the sky, or the way the wind is moving through the pine needles, and interpreting that and knowing like, oh, when the birds sing like that and the cirrus clouds are like that, that portends X. Or, if you hear two owls hooting like this, and then you feel a breeze like this, like that portends this. Mm. Again, like this whole field awareness. So it's not like you couldn't work your way through a forest and have a very meaningful experience and not pick up these signs. But they're these really cool gifts. They're like Easter eggs. They're like these little gold nuggets thrown out. So, clearly all sorts of really powerful therapy is done all over the world that is not psychodynamically informed. Like, you don't have to do therapy that way. But if you are trained in that modality, again, you learn it's almost like magic. You learn to see things, to feel things, to pick up things. Again, like maybe in my metaphor, like the sound of an owl or the shape of a cloud that can suggest some very powerful, interesting things that are coming or that are happening. So again, I think so much of what we're trying to do with therapy models is help people have a scaffolding to work with someone and also know where to put their attention. Because I remember when I was learning therapy in residency, we were trained in CBT and psychodynamic models and interpersonal and group process. And I remember sitting with people like, what am I supposed to think about? Like, what do I do? Do we make a thought record? Am I supposed to be, like, what do I do and say? And, and again, it's almost like back to my soccer metaphor. It would be, as you learn therapy, it would be like at the same time you're learning to dribble and juggle and pass, that you're also learning, well, there's this kind of offensive strategy and this kind of zone, and there's here are other ways that you're learning kind of the bigger theories of the field, and you're just like, wait, I'm just trying to figure out how to pass the fucking ball. Mm-hmm. Like, who do I pass to? Mm-hmm. Like, when do I pass?
Right.
But again, with therapy training, you eventually need to hang your therapy mindset on at least, I don't know, 1 or 2, 3 different templates. And you also have to have the skills. But again, my strong bias, because this is what I was marinated in, I think if one of your frameworks is the psychodynamic framework, you can travel through the therapy forest and you can do magic. You can do things that non-psychodynamically therapists would just miss. And like, how did you know that? How did you see that? Like, or what just happened? Something very important just happened. I mean, sometimes in some of my therapy sessions, when I have a psych NP student in there for the session, afterwards we process it. And it's really interesting. They might say, when you did this, why? Or it seems like something really important happened, at this point. And like, what was that? And usually what they're noticing is we moved into the here and now. Mm-hmm. And we went from the there and then and here and now. And that's where it gets electric. Like, that's where the space between patient and therapist just crackles. And so I think anybody sitting in there is like, whoa, what the heck was that?
And I also think that that's the antidote, right? Because I think where transference and countertransference get tricky is when we're not talking about it and we're not acknowledging it in the space. Mm-hmm. But like when you say the thing, like, I'm noticing I'm having this reaction with you. I mean, obviously you want the client to say that, because I want to go to my supervisor first and be like, I'm having this reaction, and kind of explore it and figure out what's relevant to say. But I love that the here and now is really the place where, and I see it all the times in groups, like nobody wants to go there. There's sort of this resistance, but then when people come in and we talk about this is what's really happening between and among us, mm-hmm. there's that electric feeling. Mm-hmm. And it's a place of intimacy, mm-hmm. the true intimacy.
I wish, listeners, you could be sitting here right now, because one of the reasons that I only record live for my podcast, and Carrie and I are sitting here live, like the space is crackling between us. Like, it's really alive. Mm-hmm. And we're not doing therapy, but we're just like, there's all this like energy between us as our minds are crackling on different things. And it's really cool. And I hope you all can hear it. And I think it is a difference between a podcast that's recorded on Zoom and one where 2 people are sitting face to face, because who we are and the energy we bring to stuff, like, it can't help but get activated because we both respect each other and we've worked together, and we're creating another episode together, and it's just really cool to be in that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's also an aliveness that we are in the moment. Like, we didn't plan what we were going to say, and we're kind of like having to feel into each other's energy to create something. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the other thing that I love about group work or work that is not totally manualized, is that it requires you to be more vulnerable and open and like willing to be impacted by the person across from you, like mm-hmm. we are right now. Like, mm-hmm. I'm like, where's Craig going to go and how am I going to respond? And there's vulnerability in that. Rein him in? Right. Like, what's going to happen here? And
how much longer is he going to talk?
I do want to say name one thing that I notice is a hang up for me, is that I really like the positive transference, and I really can get caught in it. And I think a lot of us can. And I recognize that it's really easy for me to want to really work when I feel like someone's seeing me inaccurately, but it can be hard when they're seeing me the way that I want to be seen, but is not healthy for the relationship. One of my teachers said, Carrie, she has like a spiritual background, and she said, Carrie, you have to learn to assist the Divine Mother, not be her. And so I keep that in mind in my groups because I can want to project, and like it feels good when clients are like, oh, you're just so whatever, and we can eat it up. And so
I think it's actually the more dangerous countertransference. Early in my career, I remember thinking, okay, I got to watch for the negative countertransference. I got to feel it when negative stuff comes up in me, when anger, resentment, or boredom, or frustration, or something. But it's become clear to me now that is not the problem usually. Not that can't, I could tell a bunch of stories that causing problems. What tends to cause way more problems, a lot of problems, is a whole lot of positive countertransference. So one of the things I've been thinking about as I've been teaching therapy workshops and just this spring, a little plug for this, I'm doing a deep dive on transference and countertransference in Vancouver Island with Hilary McBride. We're going to do a 2-day training on that. So I've been thinking a lot about this, but what I've been thinking about lately, I guess this came up because recently I've been thinking a lot about self-disclosure and just thinking about myself, like when do I tend to self-disclose? When do afterwards I think, oh, I think that was too much. And what I've realized is when I have patients who I identify with, so physicians, runners, people who went to Colorado College, like people who have twins, like anything. If someone comes in like, oh, I have identical twins, like I do too. And again, earlier in my career, I thought, oh, how great when I meet someone who has some of the same features as me. Finally, I'm wising up and realizing that if somebody has something that I really relate to, I have to be really careful for all sorts of reasons. One, I could tend to just share too much that's not helpful, take the spotlight out of them. The other thing is this whole phenomenon of sort of merging or twinning transference. So this is the idea. Let's say a physician. I'm seeing a physician like, oh, I relate to you so much. That we can kind of unconsciously form this twinning, this convergence where on the outside it feels like, oh, we're so together. There's so much positive energy. Like I know you, or we've been through all this together. But what it does, it prevents so many things from happening. It often prevents the patient from truly sharing what's going on, not wanting to disappoint me, not wanting to feel like a failure. Oftentimes when people are saying things like, oh, my therapist feels more like a friend, when I hear that now, I think, oh, like there's so much positive energy between you two that you're in this sort of, convergence twinning thing. So I'm realizing that so often when people come in and there's anything I can really relate to, I have to take a big breath and realize, okay, this is going to be challenging because I have to stay in the therapist role. I have to not over-identify. I think, oh, I know you because fill in the blank. You are an endurance trail runner. You grew up in the same town. You went to the same college. You have identical twin daughters. But we take away so much of the possibilities. Like the more we identify and we co-identify, all these other things go off the table that aren't okay to talk about. And so we just limit the possibilities. So I think when there's really positive transference and or countertransference, it feels so good, but really you're giving people increasingly crappy therapy that's not depth oriented, that doesn't allow for the full range of affect and possibilities and shame. The more you're twinning with someone, are they really going to bring up their shit? No. The more they twin with you, the more they're not going to go there. So again, what I love about what we do, so many things, but one is it's so rich, so many years into this. And, I feel like every week I have an aha, just thinking like, oh, that's what's happening with this patient or with therapy or even my relatively recent realization that negative countertransference is usually not the problem. It's the positive. It's the over-identification. And that's, and that's what as you said, that's what we all want, to sit down with someone like, oh, I love you already. I feel so close to you. Like, I get you already. Like, oh, we're kindred spirits. Oh, we could, in another world, we could be best friends. Like now when I hear that, or when I feel that, like, pay attention, because this person who you feel like you could be best friends with, if you're not really careful, you're going to be a really incompetent therapist for them and not give them what they need and deserve.
Mm-hmm. And when you're saying that, it reminds me too, not just in the therapy space, but in the supervision space, because I've had many experiences where it almost feels like the supervisor then starts to, it's like the parentified child, they start to share things with me, personal things, or lean on me. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, like now I'm in this role, which is a familiar role for me, right? I probably elicit that, oh, you can tell me things. But then it really undermines me because I have this supervisor who I need to help me, and I'm going into their office, and now it feels like it's mutual supervision or I'm taking care of them. And I think that that's a little bit of what you've talked about. And we can do that with our clients too. So yeah, I think the positive transference. I remember having this one woman who like wrote me poems in my early and she had just this mother that was absent. And I was just really feeling good about myself, right? Because I was doing a good job. I was an early career therapist, and I needed that affirmation that I was a good therapist, and she was laying it on thick. And fortunately, I had a good supervisor who was helping me to work through. And I still remember, I felt like I was hurting her when I pointed it out. Like I had to break the fantasy for both of us, like I'm not what you think in the same way. Like I could still be nurturing and be a corrective emotional experience, but I had to sort of knock myself off the pedestal, which I feel like I'm doing all the time. And it's hard to do because it feels pretty good up there,
Yeah. It really does.
And that's how we get cults, right? In groups. We could go into that.
Yeah.
So
I
know
one other thing about supervision.
Yeah.
For therapy, I think the group setting can be so powerful. Again, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it can be really powerful. But I would argue, and I'd love to hear what you think, I think for depth supervision, for psychodynamic supervision, for supervision where you're going to talk about hard stuff, I really think it needs to be one-on-one. Because a lot of people I know do group supervision. It's cheaper, or they do it with their colleagues. But I have to say, having now, I've been doing clinical supervision for the last 3 years, doing a lot of it. The stuff that people bring up that's most important, it's hard stuff. It's not, what dose of Abilify should I use? Or, do you think this person needs another session of ketamine? No. The hard stuff is the psychodynamic stuff. It's the shame stuff. It's the fear. It's the stuff that is really hard, if not impossible, to bring up in a group setting, because you would think like, what are people going to think? Or this is going to take up the whole time because this is so heavy, or I can't believe I made this mistake, or, and I think in the one-on-one supervision, if you find the right person, you can go to them and you could say like I did with the woman who broke the window, like, this is what I did. And a good supervisor can say, oh yeah, and just be with you and kind of hold that. And in some ways be kind of parental. And I just worry about people who are working with, in difficult cases, especially with a lot of, psychological trauma and psychodynamic issues. If they're not doing one-on-one supervision, I think they're missing something critical that just really can't happen. And it would have to be, I'm not saying that there aren't groups where people can be incredibly vulnerable. I know that exists, but in general, the kinds of stuff that come up in the one-on-one consultations I do, I'll sometimes ask people, like, do you think you could have brought, no, I have a group. I'm in a group. I would never bring this up in my group. No, this is too painful, or I feel too guilty, or just, it's too raw. I couldn't tell other people.
Yeah. Well, I have two responses to that. One, I agree that supervision, yes. But one thing, actually, it's good to bring it up now, because my colleague, Dr. Kylan Lee, and I are going to offer this. And I think it's just the way supervision groups are run do not create space for things like that. So the way that we're going to run it's called a training group, which you may have heard of. It's like where the clinicians are exploring their patterns and their transferences in the group. But it's in the service of whatever comes up for you in this group are the things that are going to come up for you with your clients, the things that are going to get in your way. So, but none of it is actually supervision. And that's what I think gets in the way. So it's more like, if you're going to do a group and you want to work on these kind of themes, then do a training group that is a process group. And you would have to apply that yourself, right? Like you wouldn't come in and talk necessarily about cases, but you could. I mean, the way we're setting it up is that it's like an interpersonal process kind of group format where people bring in, but it's all therapists who are saying, so I do think that stuff would come up in there.
Good point.
I hope. And I think a lot of times people just really run supervision groups poorly that feel more like, okay, today, would you like to talk about a patient? And it's like, no, like you don't need to talk about the patient. We need to talk about you, right? Like, why is this focused on, and then I don't know if you've been in these groups, but I've been in these groups where then there's all these suggestions. It's like, I think you should have you tried IFS? Have you done parts work? And it's like, it kind of misses like the real theme underneath. Like we're talking about where you kick the ball rather than the field, right? The field awareness. And so I do think the supervisors and supervisors who run supervision groups need more group skills than they realize, because they're actually doing a disservice by focusing on symptom management and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I agree.
It's kind of a both and. I do think you would get there probably faster in individual if the relationship was really good. And I think, though, the steroids part might evoke more of it in the group so that the group supervision could be more effective in evoking it because it's all coming up and lots of people might remind you of your clients. So,
yeah. No, I like that.
Yeah.
Good, really good point.
Yeah. So it's about time for us to wrap up. I'm curious. I wanted to make sure to ask about psychedelics because, that's a big part of both you and I are involved in that work in different ways and medicine spaces. And I'm just, after all we've said, are you talking, how are people working with transference and countertransference when medicine's on board?
Yeah. I think most people are not. And what's so scary about that? So just here's how I think about it. So, the therapy relationship, once it gets close, is really a dialectic. There's two relationships. There's the therapy relationship, and then there's the real relationship, because there is. And I think if you've been in therapy with someone who really held you and you cared about, or you've been a therapist, you know what I'm talking about, because it can feel like I really do love this person. And I get that we have this container, and not romantic love, but just like, parental love or just human love. So there's this dialectic, like we're always kind of going back and forth between like what's quote unquote the genuine relationship and the therapy relationship. And I think what happens with psychedelics often is that because fear is often turned down, connections turned way up, transference is way jacked up. So imagine a really positive transference or even erotic transference, like that can just get turned up to 11. So what happens, I think, on the therapist end is therapists could start to confound the therapeutic relationship with the real relationship, and such that, this reminds me of data that Glenn Gabbard and other people have written about, that when sexual boundary violations happen in therapy, and this is just regular therapy, but I can't imagine it's not the same in psychedelic therapy. The number one reason the therapist gives for why did you sexually transgress is, I love the patient. I love them. And I think what they're referring to is that they allowed these two relationships to sort of come together and get all mixed up, and they couldn't tease out that the only way that this supposed love they feel that allowed them to sexually transgress, that it was really confounding the two, and it could only really emerge because of the safety of the container of the therapeutic relationship, which allowed genuine love, but they didn't hold those two things. But you can imagine if you're just getting flooded with transferential positive love or affirmation from your patient on some psychedelic, you could easily, if you weren't well trained, you could think it's about me. Like this is actually lighting up something really powerful about me and or us, or like this, I have to pay attention because this is so wonderful. And this means there's something even deeper between us. Well, no, it doesn't mean that. It means that they're taking a really powerful substance which can deepen, the possibilities of the container, but it's the therapist's responsibility to realize, like, no, this is actually all concocted. This only all exists because of what's been created before and what's being created now with this compound. So, people have been violating boundaries in talk therapy and psychedelic therapy for a long time. I'm sure that will continue. But I think what's most important to recognize is that, again, the people who are sexually transgressing, for the most part, they're not sociopaths, psychopaths. They're usually just, in fact, if anything, they're often experienced people. They're people who get caught up in the overwhelming positive regard that they're getting from the patient in either the regular therapy space or the psychedelic space, and like, wow. And they just get carried away by it and raptured by it, and like, oh, I guess I think this is love. It's like that song, is this love? Is this love that I'm feeling? I think like the psychedelic therapist or the regular talk therapist, yeah, it is. This is love. Like, maybe we should meet for coffee. Like, and it's like, no, it's not. It is not. You are confounding two separate things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the place that I see it is also the clients taking the experience that they're having on the medicine or their relationship with the medicine and projecting that onto the facilitator of the medicine. So that guru, that like, you are this mystical being that's causing my healing, and rather than attributing it to the medicine and their own psyche, and that they are healing themselves, their own inner healing intelligence that we talk about. And that's getting missed. And I think a group facilitator, especially, because sometimes they're kind of up there in these psychedelic group spaces where they are a little more guru-ish and they're singing and they're moving things around, or, you've got everyone on the floor in ketamine mats. But if you're the one, it can be easy to have a lot of that positive transference and healing be like, it's because of you. Like, you did this for me, right? And I know that happens in therapy, but I think it is on steroids in the psychedelic space because the medicine is so powerful. And some people have a concept of having a relationship with the medicine, but I think that's a harder concept for people with medicine than it is like, it's this person who's offering this circle or this thing, and they really create healing. They did this thing over my body when I was, like, there's some dangerous pieces here with that transference that can happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So as we wrap up, what things do you hope that people take from our conversation? Or is there anything that like you're keeping in mind now, like as you're going through this and taking a deep dive before your workshop, that help you to be reflective about?
Yeah, I guess I would just invite people to be as curious as they can, because again, thinking back to this idea of fluency in a language, the more you learn a language, the more you realize you don't know. And I hope that the more we work in the therapy space, the more we realize it's very mysterious and it's ever changing. And that's actually really cool. Think if you did this for 5-10 years and you just totally had it dialed in. But no. And then each person that comes in it's their own mysterious universe. And so they're coming in, and then of course you're not experiencing them as they truly are, quote unquote, because you have your own lenses. And then the two of you are going to co-create something else. So, it really is like every therapy is this co-created piece of art. It's this, you're using the same brushes and colors that you might in all the other therapies, but together you can make this beautiful painting. And it's not clear what this is going to look like, but how amazing is that? The two of you get to co-create something. So I guess just to encourage people to just to have some awe and wonder at what we're doing. And if you don't have some awe and wonder about what we're doing, I think you're not paying attention, because it is magical and mysterious, and the more we think about it, the more magical it really is.
Yeah, I love that. It's like you're taking this. I think it's important to take this mindset of reverence and awe and wonder because it takes a lot of courage to be in the mystery, but it's a lot more enjoyable when you're thinking of it that way and open to the mystery and the magic of what can be created rather than in fear. Yeah. Well, thank you for this.
Yeah, this has been so fun.